When joining your vessel, you should be given a familiarization tour. The purpose of this tour is to introduce you to the various equipment and functions of the safety management system. After this orientation, it is your responsibility to read the required information in the safety management system and to ask questions when clarification is needed. This is an example of a responsibility chart for shore staff. This is an example of a responsibility chart for onboard personnel. The duty list shall not be understood as being the only document stating all duties and responsibilities for each crew member. It is made in order to make it easier for each new employee to know his or her main duties. In addition, there are certainly a variety of other duties and responsibilities on board the vessel that cannot be exactly specified in print. However, these duties are to be performed anyway. The main duty for each crew member is to minimize all possible safety hazards in all kinds of shipboard activities, and always strive to find safer methods of performing the daily work routine. The crew members and other personnel on board must familiarize themselves with the muster list and emergency instructions, which are displayed on board. They specify details of the general emergency alarm signal and also the action to be taken by crew and passengers when the alarm is sounded. They specify details of the fire emergency signal and also the action to be taken by crew and passengers when the alarm is sounded.
Accidents and disasters happen, but always for a reason. They are not random events. Investigations afterwards often reveal that the causes were known before the incident occurred. The idea of risk management and formal safety assessment is to identify, assess, and manage the risks before they lead to an incident. The aim of this video is to show how the ship's management team can begin to manage the risks on their own ship. There are underlying causes for every event. To take an example, the destruction of the Challenger space shuttle.
7, 6, we have main engine start. 4, 3.
The cause of the explosion was traced to the failure of the O-rings which held together sections of the external fuel tanks. But it was not just a simple technical failure. The Presidential Commission investigating the accident discovered that the possibility of O-ring failure under the cold weather conditions of the launch was well known to the engineers who designed and made them.
Challenger, go and throttle up.
But they were unable to convince their managers to halt the flight. Those in direct charge of the launch were never informed. The launch went ahead with tragic results. The equipment did fail, but the essential failure lay elsewhere. Wherever there are choices, there are risks.
You can see as we get out between the San Carlos breakwaters that there's a continual...
From the boardroom to the bridge to the engine control room, good managers have always known that. They keep their operations effective by being aware of the hazards around them and making sure that they avoid them. Much of the time, this is done unconsciously, even intuitively. Risk management seeks to bring this process out into the open and make it a central feature of each and every procedure. This benefits everyone on the ship.
A seafarer needs to know about risk management because a seafarer in his day-to-day work is exposed to a lot of hazards, a lot of risks he has to take when he's doing his job. Therefore, if he has safety on his mind as the highest priority, then he can know when to take a risk and when not to take a risk.
The risk associated with any operation is a product of two factors: the probability of the hazards materializing and the consequences if they do. The probability of an incident from any given hazard will vary from low through to high. The consequence can be small to large, even catastrophic. So an unlikely event, with little or no impact, has a low risk. Perhaps nothing needs to be done. But in any other area on this diagram, risk management should be considered to reduce the risk. This may mean both reducing the probability and minimizing the consequence. Risk assessment is also dynamic. If any circumstances change, the risk will always change too. You cannot avoid risk, so the objective must be to manage it. In the case of the Challenger, although the chance of the hazard occurring was thought to be very rare, the consequences would always have been catastrophic.
Explosion appeared to come from one of the solid rocket boosters which supply most of the power for the liftoff.
When you're approaching the dry dock, okay, let's pull out the chart.
The risk management of any operation needs to take a very wide view of the potential hazards.
When you're approaching the dry dock,
Although these are often apparent, the assessment of the risk they represent may be subjective. Statistics are not always available. Different people will have different views on how often the hazard might happen and how bad the result might be.
that's right. And we will have to be extremely cautious.
Those on board must take control of every operation and not assume that someone has thought it all out correctly beforehand. The procedures set out in the manual will be the starting point, but circumstances may have changed and further precautions may be needed.
So let's first have a look at your tank cleaning plan.
The first stage is to identify the hazards, keeping as broad a view as possible. Ask, what if? What can go wrong? And what happens if the opposite to that intended occurs? For example, suppose someone has to enter a tank or cargo hold. What if the tank ventilation left some pockets of toxic gas or insufficient oxygen? What if someone fell? Secondly, assess the risks associated with those hazards. What would be the result? And how likely is it to happen? Inside the enclosed space, for instance, a fall or a pocket of toxic gas could prove fatal. Such incidents are not uncommon at sea. The experience of all those on board will be helpful in deciding how likely the hazards are. Then explore the options available to minimize the probability of these events occurring, and consider what could be done to reduce their impact. For hold or tank entry, has ventilation been adequate? Has the atmosphere been thoroughly tested? Is BA required or a backup team needed? Is training required? Then carry out a thorough cost-benefit analysis of all the options available. On that basis, implement the most appropriate option to manage the risk. Finally, and crucially, constantly monitor the outcome and check that the plans are effective, and modify them when necessary.
Master or member of a bridge team, to ensure a successful passage with a pilot on board, is to listen to the pilot, liaise with the pilot, include the pilot into your team, and really get the best out of him.
Further, during this investigation, anecdotal evidence was received indicating that around 75% of bridge teams have a neutral or negative effect on the pilot's ability to carry out their duties, and only 25% actually assist them.
It is essential for safe pilotage that the pilot is not merely on the bridge as a professional advisor, but is an integral part of the bridge team.
And one man cannot do this job alone. It's a teamwork between the captain, the pilot, and the officers and the crew who are on the bridge. It's a bridge teamwork. It works well.
It is in everyone's interests to work as a team. It makes life easier and, above all, safer.